G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far I hope that you're also having a brilliant weekend and heading into an even better working week. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. So of course we're going to be looking at the maps, we're going to be comparing maps, we're going to look at geolocations, but I want to step a little bit further back again and talk about what may be some future movements, because at the end of the day, this is attritional war. And territory is a byproduct of attrition. The primary goal is to reduce your enemy's potential. So we're going to speak about then what is coming, collapse, potential pressure put on other areas, and how other analysts are starting to talk about what we refer to as the bankruptcy theory of little by little and then all at once, or crossing that event horizon and everything pointing towards a singularity. So we'll talk more about that. We're going to look at a plane that's on fire, some drones being tested. We're going to look at Zelensky, of course, with his crackdown on the anti-corruption agencies, and the European Union cutting aid. And could this, through Zelensky cracking down, saying, well, I don't want any of my senior members and my friends looked into for corruption, it's not suspicious, but could this provide the European Union an off-ramp for a war they are currently losing? And then an extension on that maps, collapse, future movements and attrition, we're going to go through a US Army massive breakdown around how Russia fight. There's going to be an extension on that. And I got sent it across saying, hey, Willie, this has come out and this really goes over things you've been speaking about for many years, but there are some very interesting bits and pieces in that too. So strap in, crack a beer, and we'll see how long this video goes for. Sadly, I won't be cracking a beer because of the chemo. I'm on day 2, doing well so far. So let's have a look at this. So Ukraine's GUR, military intelligence, they released this video here, lighting a Su-27UB on fire. And we've seen many different videos like this before. Now, everyone's reporting that this is completely destroyed. From the footage here, the tail section on fire, I could not confirm if this has been destroyed or not. But we still do know Russia is outproducing losses of aircraft. Su-27 is an older one in Russia's arsenal. Now, what we do know, and we have spoken about, is the Ukrainian drone boats, which we don't see much anymore, but the Ukrainian drone boats did wreak havoc for a while on Russia's Black Sea fleet. It doesn't mean that it has completely been destroyed by any means, and it doesn't mean that it's now not operational. But we do know from offensive weapons, you learn your own defenses and can produce your own offensive capability too. And what this is training footage of Russia training with their own drone boats. And you can see the massive explosion here as well. Now, what we did talk about, and I'd been speaking about for some time, was people raising the flag with me behind the scenes, raising concerns of the Ukrainian drone boats. Although everyone loved to scream and applaud for domestically produced blah, 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 it eventually came out that it was enabled by many, and people did question if it did undermine some of Taiwan's defenses. As we know, a lot of that technology share, information intelligence was through there. And let's just have a look at what some of the Russian pages are saying about this. At the July Storm exercise, the Russian Baltic Fleet deployed maritime drones. They are publishing videos of drone strikes. Judging by the explosion's power, the warhead is quite large. The device is equipped with a camera and direct communication channel. This is confirmed by footage showing the drone's targeting control up to the moment of detonation. So again, we may see something like that enter the fold. Of course, there is no targets for these drones for Russia at the moment, but you never know what will happen in the Black Sea or softening up targets on then shorelines. So let's have a look at the maps and talk about what is happening and what potentially we are seeing. Okay, so I'll explain the maps in 1 second, but of course, if you're here, you know what it looks like. Now, all eyes are on Pokrovsk and the envelopment down here. But could Russia be planning on creating a simultaneous crisis in multiple sectors? Again, The way to have the upper hand on the battlefield is attacks simultaneously and successively. That is a way to reintroduce maneuver, but also the way to maintain initiative on the battlefield. And this is exactly why Kursk ultimately failed and other areas for Ukraine. Well, they had attacks, they had early success, but then didn't have successive or simultaneous attacks on other areas. And what we are seeing is we see a lot of resource allocation from the Russians up in the north around Kupiansk. We see it around Terny, the envelopment. We see it in the Seversky envelopment, multiple different areas. Yes, all eyes are on Pokrovsk, but could there be, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'm saying it fits within the doctrine and the resources that they want to create multiple crises in many sectors, leveraging off their advantages. And this comes from attritional warfare doctrine. You have the initial phase of hostilities, which is your initial attacks, and then you have a period of where you focus on then reindustrializing or industrializing, and then re-recruiting or conscripting if needed, and digging in. The second phase is what we are in now. That first phase, that started when Russia's initial invasion didn't work as planned, and that acceptance in 2022 of attritional warfare until back on offensive in 24. That's the first phase, and now we're in the second. The offensive should be launched across a broad front, seeking to overwhelm the enemy at multiple points using shallow attacks. The intent is to remain inside a layer bubble of friendly protective systems, from fires to electronic warfare, while stretching depleted enemy reserves until the front collapses. There is a cascading effect in which a crisis in one sector forces the defenders to shift reserves from another sector, only to generate a crisis there in turn. And this is what we have been seeing the Russians do, from offensives in Kharkiv to offensives in Sumy in the south and on secondary sectors. But could we see a more all-in on this? Only then should the offensive, once you've generated that crisis, extend towards objectives deeper in the enemy rear. Concentration of forces on one main effort should be avoided, as this gives an indication of the offensive's location and opportunity for the enemy to concentrate their reserves against this key point. So if you have a singular key point such as Pokrovsk, well, Ukraine, of course, can concentrate their reserves there. So I'm not saying that it's going to be all at once with the same amount of resource, but we will see continually pushing on secondary or tertiary frontline areas, even though Pokrovsk may be primary. But what we don't know is, could there be multiple primaries before trying to get in and reintroduce, if possible, some level of deep maneuver. What you have heard me talk about a lot is this little by little, then all at once, or bankruptcy, as we call it, that you're not playing poker one day, then you lose your house, your wife, your kids, and everything. No, you lose little by little, and then all at once it occurs. And Megan Mobbs here is president at this foundation, Director, Center for American Safety and Security, West Point grad, former paratrooper, clinical psychologist, has said this in reply to a John Helen, who is very good military analyst, has said, "My greatest fear is for Ukraine slowly and then all at once about the frontline situation." We'll go over what John has said a little bit later. Attritional warfare is slow and ponderous until it isn't. Yes, terrain or tactics can introduce surprise, but the core logic of this type of warfare is cumulative. Setting up potential for non-linear breakdowns is to reduce, then you have that breakdown. Is as much as your enemy failing, then you winning. As such, attrition relies on steady accumulation of advantages or disadvantages. In this, of course, manpower, numerical man fires, which can create conditions for abrupt, disproportionate shifts rather than steady, predictable decline. And this is why many, including myself, have said, when and if Pokrovsk comes under Russian control, don't expect it to stop on the northwestern side. We may be like Vuhledar or Avdiivka, where then you have a 20 or 30 kilometre jump. The problem is how thin are those lines and how defended are those lines, and may keep going. It is in this way that attrition poses a non-linear dynamic. Incremental pressures build over time. But once critical thresholds, supply shortages, morale failure, or numerical inferiority are crossed, the disadvantaged side can unravel quickly. And That's that all at once. And this is where the mob online, who like to speak about constant or linear trends of movement on the front line, this is why they ride the short bus. They go, oh, we'll take 1,000 years to get there. It doesn't work like that. Non-linearity in this context also means outcomes aren't directly proportional to inputs. Wars exhibit chaos-like behaviour where thresholds cause rapid shifts. In short, the strategy's power lies in stacking effects over time and exploiting that, which risks or enables the explosive non-linear turning points. This is why attrition is risky. It's hard to predict when the all-at-once moment arrives. So this is my fear. The war's slow grind masks building vulnerabilities for Ukraine, where manpower shortages could precipitate a sudden unravelling unless addressed decisively and rapidly. But with manpower, any solution, even if today Zelensky took the most radical manpower solutions, it's going to be a minimum of 12 to 18 months before they are on the front line being able to actually conduct offensive warfare. This is where Zelensky was incredibly correct. John Helen, this is what he wrote that Miss Mobs was replying to. Writing about the frontline situation and changes in Ukraine is hard because I feel there has been very little new to say for a long time. The same patterns repeat. The Russians creep forward at varying rates. The Ukrainians suffer from manpower issues. Sometimes a flank gets weakened enough that the Russians form a pocket or threaten a city. Ukrainians use up resources to withdraw from an area they should have left a while ago. The Russians won't create larger operational success. Ukrainian counterattacks remain tactical. And this paint by numbers we've seen again and again. Russia build on the flanks, hold in place, attrit, Ukraine pulling out way too late. The situation looks largely stable from Western capitals. But in actuality, it slowly worsens for Ukraine, little by little. It's just at such a rate that it doesn't raise red flags. The Russian rate of advance slowly rises. More gaps appear in Ukrainian lines. New aid or sanctions or long-range strikes or other political decisions don't seem to change the situation one way or another. And this is what we've been told again and again, is once this weapon comes, it will be this. Once this strike happens, it will be this. And it doesn't change it markedly one way or the other. I've used bad but slowly getting worse to describe the situation for longer than I remember now. And slowly worse until it's not. Even the loudest supporters and critics of Ukraine are sort of aligned in a collective shrug about the prospect of Pokrovsk failing because the impact will be limited. Mind you, it's all much better than a catastrophic situation for Ukraine. It's just hard to say a lot about it. Well, it depends how long and how many resources Ukraine choose to tie up trying to hold Pokrovsk as well. In my opinion, the best move for Pokrovsk right now is to fall back into the city, try and pull out as much as possible before it just becomes what it is right now of a mass killing ground. But the number one problem for Ukraine, the number one, is manpower. Everyone knows it, most choose to ignore it. And there was a comment under this by Mr. Case says, reality remains the same for the past year. Russian economy is going to shit faster than Ukraine's ability to hold the front. Now, I vehemently disagree with that. And not much has changed in either directions. In a month, we will see the actual effects of the EU-UK price cap. I have no hope in Trump, and that will give us a timeline. Now, what I will say to this is this comment could have been lifted from 2022 and no one would actually notice a difference. And I haven't actually seen this opinion shared by any serious economists, including our own. Everyone agrees that the Russian economy is facing issues, that it was running hot and it needs to cool. But also, all serious economists that I have seen, they do say that this can be sustained for a number of years, just cooling off, not a total collapse. The exact same messaging we've heard from 22, and the economy has been significantly more resilient. And of course, the longer it goes on, the less impacts sanctions are going to have. So is Russian economy attriting? Yes. Is the front line attriting? Yes. Is the economy going to shit faster than the front line for Ukraine? In my personal opinion, and I think fairly well then developed opinion over a number of months, an educated opinion on this, Absolutely not. Not even close. Maybe I'll eat my words. So will Russia take advantage of multiple axes on here, create major crises, and could we actually see a reintroduction of deeper war, or the continuation of what we are seeing of this grind? Because, well, why change something if it's working? And we're going to look at how the Russians had somewhat teaching many Western generals the art of attritional war. So let's have a look at the maps. Here is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Any red check that you see is ground Russia has made over the past 24 hours. Now, we do see a lot larger movements per geolocation, which is the best sort of indication of movement, than actually on the maps. So let's come down here. We have Velika Novosilka. I wonder if many bloggers have actually accepted that this has fallen. Yes, but this is what I'm talking about. When a major area falls, it can then take a big step beyond that. So let's have a look up here in the north, Zelensky, not in grey zone. Well, I can tell you that it definitely is in grey zone. By creamy caprice, he gives this. Now, it's not the easiest, I guess, to line up in the world, but you can somewhat get an idea of where the border of Ivanivkia is sitting. And then Zelensky, moving right up into Dnipropetrovsk borderline area. You can line this up here, and then we have at 1 minute on this video, so I was trying to read my own writing here. This is where we see multiple flags going up throughout Zelensky. Of course, this is what we spoke of yesterday, the massive celebration of Ukraine recovering one area in Sumy. And yeah, that's good, but there's 3-4 villages lost like that every other day. So there's more geolocations we need to look at here. So that's Zelensky, that's in the north. And then we'll come down then into the west, and we have Malivkia in here as well. And of course, the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So let's firstly have a look, and I've already made this one up. We have multiple geolocations of flags going up right in this sector, then across the border. I know there's massive denial if Russia is or is not in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. By the footage that we have, yes, they are. So we come up to 2:30 on then this video, and we have these geolocations. We do have multiple geolocations from areas there. We have the Marines flag in there. I believe we have one more geo after this one, if I'm incorrect. Maybe it was before. Regardless, we know that's where those geo confirmations took place. So Malivkia has come under control, as well as Zelensky. Realistically, this wouldn't be grey in here at the moment from the way that the front line moves. Let's have a look at Suryak maps, and he is showing Zelensky, this area coming under control, as well as Malivkia as per the geolocations that we have. So let's continue moving. Now, we speak a lot about Seversk and how Seversk has not moved for some time. And when we do see movement here, that tells us a lot. And the then envelopment that is leveraging from this Terney front line up right, we call it the Terney front, but from Kharkivkia onto Liman and Seversk. And the recent changes here after years, literally years, of no movement. So we see this map by Suryak right in here. Now, it's not the easiest thing in the world to see, but of course, this is Serebrenyanka and movement through the Kremenar forest all the way up to about here. Now, if we do try and measure this, the best that we can, some 4.7, around 5 kilometers behind the line, which is a long way, especially through an area where Russia's advantages are reduced, close terrain, urban or forested areas. And this is why we speak about Ukraine needs to somewhat to delay Russia, get them into close terrain. If you're in open terrain, Russia's advantages on manpower and fires are exacerbated. That's why that pull back into Pokrovsk and then come out. Now, that's just a map showing us that. Well, no, we have a geolocation too. So this again is off Mr. Creamy Caprice all the way up to about here, that 4.7 to 5 kilometers behind the line. This is where we see movement of then Russian forces and Russian flags and unit flags then being raised. This in here, very, very deep, considering the close terrain territory in there. Far more movement than in open terrain, like 5Ks in close terrain versus 5 in open, significantly more concerning. Okay, so let's go up and down the maps, have a look where we actually are seeing some things change. Kharkiv, to the east of Vovchansk, we can see that there has been confirmed by the Ukrainian map that there has been a Russian advance. Suryak map, further confirmation of that then taking place. Let's move our way down. We have Pokrovsk, the area we spoke about, Pokrovsk eastern front, some more areas being made into Yamblonivka. Again, still far behind the geolocations. I don't see how you can actually ignore, if you have several dudes hanging flags, at least it's grey zone at fucking best, isn't it? And then come on to the western side of the eastern flank of Pokrovsk, the area that is growing more and more critical. And we do have here in Rozhene a Ukrainian counter in here. Now, this is over the last 3 days, but I actually believe that Suryak is delayed on this. I actually think it was more like 3 or 4 days ago. You and I reported that off. Mr. Playfra, I showed his X account the other day. If you just go on John Helen, you'll be able to find he celebrated hitting 10,000 followers the day after I shared his account on here. I'd like to just take a tiny bit of credit, but he does some fantastic work. He reported this a few days ago, just along into Rozhene. Again, Deep State map isn't showing it, although they have incentive to, so maybe it was closed back up. I don't know. And then we have Pokrovsk actual Udashne area, as you are familiar with, then Zerezove, and this filling in around Zerezove to the south of then Troyandia as well, and says that the Ukrainian army, they're clashing here. There has been some small bit of ground and clashes right around here. But again, Suryak is actually behind most other mappers, most other reliable mappers too. They are more reporting that this looks significantly more like that at the moment. So just give it a minute on that. And of course, this little bit of ground being made around Hodakove, I don't think that is new ground being made. Now, before we do an extension on then this collapse, bankruptcy, etc., we need to talk about Zelensky absolutely not shooting himself in the foot with a pistol, blasting his fucking foot off with a 155 howitzer, ruining his credibility internally. And I don't give a shit what leaders are saying publicly. With this anti-corruption stuff, there'll be a lot of people going, what the fuck? People read this in the media and then see Keir Starmer or Macron and his husband saying we're going to give a hell of a lot more money. And people go, no, this can have huge, huge impact. And this article here, the EU cuts aid to Ukraine over corruption concerns. Zelensky's anti-corruption policies have already provoked Ukraine's first anti-government protests since the Russian invasion of 2022. Now it seems they may cost the country a portion of its foreign aid from the EU, in a clear rebuke from the bloc, once a staunch ally. And the European Union has been absolutely the largest ally of Ukraine, saying everything from accepting Ukraine and absorbing them into NATO, the EU, the support, all this, maybe not monetarily, but as far as shaping everything to bring in, absolutely. So that is far more concerned than if the US was doing this. The EU said on Friday that it would withhold 1.5 billion euros or $1.7 billion from an overall fund of 4.5 billion euros, whose disbursement is dependent on achieving good governance standards and that can't be used for military purchases. The decision is not final. However, the funding can be restored if Ukraine meets certain benchmarks. This all comes as Zelensky is asking the European Union, the same people, asking them for more money to pay salaries. I'm guessing no one in Zelensky's party has reduced their salary. Actually, for a fact, I know they've increased their salary. And in War is a Racket, I can't remember the author of it, what he speaks of is in war, all then officials should go onto the wage of a private soldier to try and reduce any financial decisions being made as well. I think that's a good idea. I'd like to see that in like Australia, that if we go into war, that the Prime Minister's then paid as per a digger on the front line. Mr. Zelensky has no public comment on the aid cut, which nevertheless was a setback for Ukraine's leader, who is depending on European financial support to fill gaps left by the Trump administration's refusal. While holding back Western aid to spur reform was common before Russia's invasion, Friday's decision seemed to signal a new willingness by the bloc to admonish Mr. Zelensky's government on domestic policy during the war. It also raised questions about whether the glow around Zelensky might be beginning to dim among Ukraine's Western allies. One thing which Zelensky has given is he has now given the EU an off-ramp. The EU was caught up in this with no way to get out of it. It may be giving an off-ramp here. Mr. Wasserstrom, an American anti-corruption expert, said in an interview that the luster is definitely coming off. Mr. Zelensky's wartime leadership among governments providing financial assistance, there is exasperation at Zelensky in the donor community, and that the luster is definitely wearing off. And it wasn't there for a lot of people actually in Ukraine, but the media, NAFO, etc., heralded a new Churchill, if that's what you want to be, I guess. The EU's decision capped a tumultuous week for Mr. Zelensky, who first pushed a measure through Parliament that stripped the independence of 2 anti-corruption agencies. He then reversed course, submitting a new bill to Parliament to restore the agency's independence, still with oversight that calmed the street protests, but could not head off the EU's aid cut, which had already been decided on the basis of long-standing guidelines. That said, he has resubmitted a bill here, but multiple MPs, they're saying, well, there might be then a swing back, so they may not pass it through. So it still needs to be then actually shot down, and it may not, because they say it's going to be the anti-corruption agencies taking revenge. Bullshit. It might be the anti-corruption agencies actually doing their job and going, yeah, you are fucking corrupt, mate, to someone who has done this. Again, if you're not corrupt, you've got nothing to fear. That's it. That's it. My opinion on this. You can fucking investigate me for corruption. Right. I have zero fear of that. The only fear is you'll see how fucking broke I actually am trying to survive in the Australian inflated market. Two agencies, the NABU and the SAPO, had been investigating top ministers in Zelensky's government. Just by chance, I guess. The president's decision to kneecap them, though reversed, not reversed yet, it still needs to actually pass, prompted accusations of cronyism that jeopardised backing from civil society groups at home and Western nations bankrolling the war. European Commission spokesman told journalists in Brussels on Friday that Ukraine had requested a disbursement in June despite falling short on 3 of 16 benchmarks, including failing to make appointments to a specialised anti-corruption court. So wanting more, increased salaries, blah, 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 while falling short of these and failing to make appointments for anti-corruption. People should be concerned of hundreds of billions of dollars going in when you're not willing to do this. Critics in Ukraine have complained about Zelensky's government's steady accretion of power under martial law, with investigations targeting journalists, activists, opposition politicians, banning media, banning opposition, etc., now starting to come to the forefront. Every time I see shit in the mainstream media, I just think that this is setting an environment, and I really think we could see an environment set to try and give France, Germany, etc. an off-ramp. Foreign allies are divided on those steps, with some saying they needed to keep a firm hand on the country in wartime, while others dismiss them as a raw power grab. So is it a firm hand on the country, or is it a drift into autocracy? The agencies had been investigating senior officials in Zelensky's government, including the Foreign Deputy Prime Minister, Alexei Chernyshov, who was charged with corruption in June 23, accused of taking kickbacks in a real estate deal. Mr. Chernyshov has called the accusations against him a baseless smear campaign. An independent commission last year chose the lead detective on Mr. Chernyshkov's case, this gentleman here, to head Financial Crimes Unit in the Economic Times Bureau. But Zelensky's government refused to appoint this gentleman to the role, leaving the position opening. Filling the position by Thursday is a condition for the IMF to continue. Currently, Zelensky is doing more damage to Ukraine than Putin. Putin is doing physical damage. Zelensky is undermining the very institutions, the credibility of Ukraine internationally. And the goal in attritional war is to make your enemy rot within. And Zelensky is doing nothing to stop the rot internally that is occurring. And I do not give a shit what NAFO say online, because at the end of the day, they are not the ones voting in elections if and when they take place, and they're not the ones that are refusing to sign up because of the state of the war at the moment. That's the problem. You see this happening. You see the beginning of the collapse on the front line. Why are people going to sign up, and why, if those are conscripted, are they going to be motivated to throw their life into the fire as well? People that say that this is not connected don't understand how all-out war works. If Zelensky sneezes in Kyiv, it has an effect on the war. Vice versa. When a state is at war like this, and it's existential, you push here, there's pull there. Everything is interconnected, especially when the goal of attritional war is to reduce your potential through pressure. Military, economic, politically, exploiting, propaganda, all of that. It's a very, very hard situation at the moment. US, many people in the West are already unhappy about the amount of money. Ukraine needs not only tens of billions to stabilise or maybe slow the front line, Ukraine is then going to need hundreds of billions into the trillions to rebuild. Things like this don't inspire confidence. So, I got this comment from a Mr. Cole on my Telegram. There's a link below if you'd like. Willie, this is a US assessment of the Russian military, and give yourself a pat on the back. You were 2 years ahead of the experts, reading to us excerpts from books studying the Soviet military. Seriously, I appreciate the work. Thank you. So I've been trying to do my very best, and I read long-form bits and pieces from books or studies, and I thought, well, Cole, let me have a look into this. And this then US from the Army of Europe and Africa on how Russia fights. Now, it goes back over a couple of years. It's really from the beginning, but it does go back to 2014 as well. This was released on the 11th of July, 2025. Now, this is 166 pages, at least 166 PDF pages. Maybe I'll go through more of it at some point. I did just brush through some bits and pieces today. I'm just going to show you bits that I found interesting that you won't really hear about in a lot of the media. So, this compendium covers more than 2 years of observations. There are also gaps, lengthy periods of time between relevant vignettes, or long periods of time between observable behaviours. The narratives may on occasion appear jumpy because of this. Additionally, because not every observation fits neatly into a single warfighting function, there is some redundancy across chapters. But it goes into this, that after then initially what we saw, the Russian learning proceeds at a slower pace than one might expect. Many adaptations seem counterintuitive or incomprehensible to US observers because they are Russian solutions, and the Russians are different nonetheless. There are adaptations. But this is what I'd like to say in this, is we have this idea that no, because it seems counterintuitive or incomprehensible, that then it's not moving. And what we are seeing is currently on the front line, I see that Russia is implementing more quickly solutions and adaptations than Ukraine is at the moment. That is what I'm seeing, and I think the weapons we're seeing entering the front line and tactics being used, I think shows this. We do see that adaptation, though, is very slow. As per, they say, the Russians are slow to stand up. Finally, throughout the conduct of the war, there is one aspect of the Russian military warfighting to which the Troika directs the reader's attention, a trait which existed before the war and continues to exist now. The Russian military is a thinking, learning organisation. It can and will adapt. We should not underestimate its ability to overcome. And as Mr. Iskander Remen, or Professor Iskander Remen, says, I'll misquote him here, but under the crippling pressures of war, do not believe that your enemy won't be able to overcome and adapt. And we did, for far too long, years, just assume Russia was not going to adapt at all, and now we've got into the issues that we are in. So, speak about then the Russian perspective. We're going to be missing a lot in this. Go and have a read. Just Google this, and you will then find it. Russians do not think about movement and manoeuvre in the same manner as the US Army. Strategic mobility along internal lines of communication is one of Russia's core strengths. Unlike the US Joint Force and the Russian Federation forces, do not need to project combat power worldwide to fulfill their missions. The Russian deployment to Syria plays an important role in projecting Russia's influence in the Middle East. Of course, we've seen how that's ended up. Still a lot of influence there, but it's an outlier. Russia's strategic deployments to project its might are mostly internal to near its borders in 2008, 14, and 21, and Feb 22. In this sense, the Russian forces' strategic mobility is their form of force protection. Before and throughout the special military operation, the force staff exercise movement of entire military district groups as forces, as well as their airborne forces. And this is what many have spoken about, is this localized power projection, rather than where the US is very overextended. The US projects power from Australia to the Middle East to at home to Europe to everywhere. Is how much can they actually bring to bear in one singular location? Regarding movement and manoeuvre, Russians tend to start wars poorly but improve over time. And not only start poorly, but recovering from catastrophic initial defeats from Napoleon to Hitler. The Winter War in Finland, November 39 to March 40 is an example here. And then we continue. At the launch of Russia's special military operation, only one of the four groups of forces showed any propensity for manoeuvre warfare. And such capability was not demonstrated again through another group of forces in meaningful scale at the closing months of Avdiivka in Jan 24. Again, we're in a different sort of war. Even then, it was done at great cost to very Russian manner building, slow adaptation to lessons learned over the preceding 2 years. The period between attacks in Mariupol and Avdiivka revealed few Russian movement manoeuvre strengths, but mostly weaknesses, and the unique warfighting nature and strategic context were full on display. Despite drastic improvements to Russian operational and tactical fires described below in Fire's chapter, fire manoeuvre remained uncoordinated, better described as fire than manoeuvre. It is a recurring characteristic of Russia's way of war. But this is the way this reads the entire time. And they are somewhat self-aware when they speak about it in here, counterintuitive or incomprehensible. Because something is incomprehensible or counterintuitive doesn't mean that it is wrong. And that we see the failure of conflicts that we have stepped into, and we are yet to see how this is going to end. And the chapter above this one speaks of Russia not having a Western-style NCO corps and being a reason for a lot of this. That said, a Western-style NCO corps can be a very big drawback in a war with huge losses, being, of course, attritional style of warfare. And we'll refer to this. In attritional war, NATO-style NCOs, this method has a downside. That NCOs, they take years to develop. And in a war where you have huge amounts of losses, only time can generate leaders capable of executing NATO doctrine. And time is one thing the massive demands of attritional war do not give. And further, NATO equipment is incredibly technologically advanced, but that means you need highly skilled people with a lot of training to take that up, and you don't have that time under the demands of attritional war. So the Soviets could surge to a much larger low end. Let's continue. In the Soviet Union system, and as per somewhat the Russians using a hybrid of it, the absence of reliable NCOs created an officer-centric command model. Less flexible than NATO's, but more adaptable to large-scale expansion required by attritional war. Put more brutally, the ability to sustain much larger losses. However, as a war progresses past the 1 year mark, frontline units will gain experience and have an improved NCO corps is likely to emerge. The key difference between models is that NATO doctrine cannot function without high-performing NCOs. The weapons, vehicles, everything is too complex. The doctrine is too complex. The Soviet doctrine was enhanced by experienced NCOs but did not require them. And as that NATO start very strong and weaken over time, where the Russians can start very weak and strengthen over time in an attritional style war. And I somewhat recently spoke to a group of people in a theatre specifically about this, and I asked, if you took X amount of losses, how long could you sustain to fight? And how long would it take to replace you and you and you and you? A decade. And this is talking then back in 22 and 2023. That Ukraine is but one theatre, a major theatre to be sure, but neither success or failure in Ukraine will alter Russia's global calculus. In 22, Russia annexed 4 Ukrainian provinces and pronounced them as part of Russia now in favour. These 4 provinces, including Crimea, which was illegally annexed by Russia in March 2014, from the Russian perspective, almost all blood now lies spilled on Russians is defending Russian territory. So they see this as their own territory. The sole exception is a tiny sliver of Kharkiv, still occupied. It's not yet annexed by Russia. Russia cannot easily walk away from these territories that it has claimed and annexed. And this is the thing. Russia at this point, they see that as their own. How can you walk out of this? And we have seen interviews with Russian soldiers on the front line going, well, the amount of loss we have had to take these areas, we're not going to be happy if we have to give up any. After 9 years, this is a war of attrition and Russia is winning. So this is from back in 2024, 2023, and added into this new article. Russia has correctly identified Ukraine's center of gravity as Western support. Russia's strategy is to continue to hold and expand its territory in Ukraine, while wearing down Ukrainian political will through attacks on civilian infrastructure throughout the country, attriting the Ukrainian armed forces through repeated attacks, and waiting for Western political will to falter, and or Western warehouses to be emptied. It is not a bad strategy and has a decent chance of success, exactly what we are seeing. A war of attrition suits Russia well. Russia has nearly 3.5 times the population of Ukraine and has not had trouble raising additional forces. The mobilization process has been ugly to American eyes, but it worked. Russia's non-democratic governance, of course, helps make this possible. Any possible opposition leaders are then silenced through other means. Russia also maintains generally large reserve stocks, and the defence industry is hampered by sanctions and corruption, of course, producing lesser quantities of lesser quality. This is completely incorrect. No, their defence industry has massive quantity, lower quality of some aspects at least. There are some that are incredibly high quality too, but not as broad in the quality. But also, as we spoke about, for frontline systems, sometimes quality can be a bit of a burden. Would Ukraine be better off with 10 T-72s or 1 Abrams? But it remains active and increasing massively. Russia has the initiative from Feb 23, from November 22 up to Feb 23. Russia has been on the offensive and has determined the time and place of recent military engagements, determining time and place, location, and resource. Currently attacking a broad front from Svatov to Vuhledar in the south. Again, this is back. We can see where this is starting. In the fog of war, it's hard to look back at it. When did this actually start happening? And it started way back when. At least for the time being, Russia appears to have given up on manoeuvre, and Chief of General Staff Valery Zaluzny believed operational art, favouring instead artillery and mass. As per, we have seen how warfare like this can actually work. This isn't due to it all put down to uselessness and incompetence and this and that, rather than and somewhat self-aware in this incomprehensible and counterintuitive. But you need to go, well, is it me not understanding it, or is it incompetence? And that's not mutually exclusive. But this focus on artillery mass attrition rather than manoeuvre makes sense when we look at attritional warfare. Military operations in attritional conflict are very distinct from those in a war of manoeuvre. Instead of a decisive battle achieved through rapid manoeuvre, attritional war focuses on destroying enemy forces and their ability to regenerate combat power while preserving one's own. In this context, a successful strategy accepts the war will last at least 2 years and is broken into 2 distinct phases. From the initiation of hostilities, where you will have large losses, it will stall out, and then you need to mobilise large amounts of power. But in that time, between phase 1 and phase 2, little positional shifting, focus on favourable exchange of losses, building up combat power. So if you have to conscript or recruit or industry, etc., and your form of combat is fires rather than manoeuvre, it makes sense. And as I've shown you before, this doctrine is what Russians are following to a T. Just because it's incomprehensible to you and you may not understand it, it doesn't mean that it's incompetence. The second phase can commence after the one side has met the following conditions. You've got enough forces, newly mobilised forces, strategic reserves exhausted, you've got fire recon superiority, and the industrial sector is degraded. Russia has ticked off these boxes to a degree on the industrial sector, because Ukraine's industrial sector is the West. But what it has done is lengthen the war until there is a real there's not appetite to supply more into Ukraine, and it has degraded the Western industrial sector. It's emptied out any warehouse full of shells. So yes, it's ticked off these and mostly ticked off 3, and then the second phase has begun. Chapter 4, fires. All these observations demonstrate the Russian forces, their thinking, learning, and their adaptive army. This is not always immediately obvious to American or NATO observers. Russians think, learn, and adapt their own, uniquely Russian ways. They draw lessons that we might not, and they adapt in ways we might not even consider. Doesn't mean that it's incorrect. I think there's many, well, I shouldn't say I think, I know there are many officers who are getting a lot of a holy shit lesson taught about attritional war. Fires adaptations, described above, come after nearly 2 years of failure in the special military operation. However, by spring 24, Russian combined arms army are capable of employing their army artillery groups. So this change up, but still, this still sits within the time frame of this achieving superiority. The key to improvements in Russian fighters and their ability to maximise new means of attack has been their use of reconnaissance UAVs. Russia has done this by improving, producing and employing multiple redundant types of UAVs with extended ranges to work, as ISR speaks in this about all-land drones with laser designators, as we spoke about and speculated on 2 years ago. Russians aim for mass production of semi-expendable and expendable systems updated by commercial off-the-shelf solutions, something very suitable to the current operational environment for high-end mechanised warfare and ability to surge in mass. The military operation has proven that modern warfare demands not only constant improvements to systems capabilities, but also large quantity of high-quality systems. All Russian improvements to their fires depend on the success and survivability of the recon UAVs, which are keys to bringing to bear Russian long-range fires, joint fires capability, blah, blah, blah. But also that it doesn't need to be that high-end if you've got that amount of mass, and it can be expendable. Due to their years of large-scale combat experience in Ukraine, the Russian forces are now pacing threat for operational and tactical fires in the rapidly evolving, technologically enhanced operational environment. I know Zelensky and everyone loves to go on the most experienced army in the world at the moment is Ukraine. No, it is not. The most experienced army in the world at defensive operational warfare, yes, that is Ukraine. The most experienced army at the world at the moment in mass fires and offensive actions is Russia. Russia have far more experience than Ukraine being on the offense. And way more than the rest of the world. Ukraine has more experience than the rest of the world combined, bar Russia. When people say China has no experience and we do, we've got experience in Afghan and Iraq. War with China's not going to look like that. So we're both sort of starting from day one. The West is not prepared for this kind of war. This is from something I've shown you previously from a couple of years back. To most Western experts, attritional strategy is counterintuitive. Again, what did I say? That they, just because you didn't understand it, maybe I'm on the wrong article here. Where was it? Counterintuitive or incomprehensible, and back to in this as well, that just because you don't understand it, it was on this slide in here, doesn't mean then that it is something that's not working, because it is. They draw on their own Russian way, they draw lessons we might not adapt, so we need to be open to this as well. This is a reflection of common Western attitude. The wars of attrition are treated as exceptions, something should be avoided at all costs, and generally the products of leaders. Unfortunately, any near-peer war is going to become this. Even if there's a large disparity in power, Ukraine, Russia, India, Pakistan, it can get drawn into attritional war. The attritional nature of combat, including the erosion of professionalism due to casualties, levels the battlefield no matter which army started with the better trained forces. As the conflict drags on, the war is won by economies, not armies. States that grasp this and fight war via an attritional strategy aimed at exhausting enemy resources while preserving their own are more likely to win. The fastest way to lose a war of attrition is focus on manoeuvre, expending valuable resources on near-term territorial objectives. Recognising that wars of attrition have their own art is vital to winning them without sustaining crippling losses. The attritional strategy is centred on defence. It's counterintuitive to most Western military officers. Western military thought views the offensive as the only means of achieving a decisive strategic goal of forcing the enemy to come to the negotiating table on unfavourable terms. How many times have we heard bringing someone to the negotiating table but on their terms? Strategic patience required to set conditions for offensive runs against their combat experience acquired in overseas counterinsurgency operations, and many exercises are very, very short. That doesn't reflect how this will actually look, and as per this own article is showing that we sort of don't understand it, we can't get our way of thinking, and there is this Western superiority complex in war that looks down upon other ways that countries fight. Yet I don't know why there is this superiority complex, because, well, you may look down on how the dudes in Afghanistan fought, the dudes in Vietnam fought, who's ultimately victorious there as well. Okay, so you do need to look and take lessons from a lot of areas, even if you don't understand it, even if you disagree with it. This is something that I thought was very, very interesting as well about enlistment rates. Enlistment rates for the first part of 24 were much higher, and we have seen that then continue to grow. Most cite 2 reasons. The second reason is sizable enlistment bonuses. This is what I spoke of yesterday. I don't think just more money from the EU to Ukrainian soldiers is going to be the be-all, end-all solution. Number one reason is the perception for the Russians that they're winning the war. And that is what I said yesterday, is you can offer more money, but guys are going to look at the front line and go, people in Ukraine can see through propaganda better than anyone else. It's the next former Soviet Union. They can see propaganda way better than NATO can, and they're not believing that bullshit either. So if you say, they can see through it, it's them actually going to fight. So this is the problem. The perception of winning or losing the war has huge effect. And if you're a Ukrainian bloke now who hasn't signed up and you see what's happening in the government, what's happening on the front line, other countries pulling away, Ukraine fatigue, etc., that's what's impacting recruitment, not just more money. Many in the West do not understand that support for the special military operation in Russia is high in Russia. And it's not just Putin who believes in Russia's goal. We have a Russia problem, not a Putin problem. And this is, I think, they call it the single man fallacy, where people like to think it's Putin and everyone else is different from that. That if you knock off Putin, then, oh my God, next thing Russia will be another Netherlands. No, it's not how it works. It's completely different. Same on the other side of Zelensky too. The whole fallacy around that decapitation and how that will actually work. That's why we haven't seen targeting of this. It's going to become masters and actually then reinforce those ideas too. Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day. We went through a lot. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.